Hello everyone. This video marks the beginning of a long-promised video that I was supposed to record on phenomenology in architecture. My entire master's thesis was on phenomenology in architecture and how to design based on the principles introduced by phenomenology. Now, this video is not covering the works of Stephen Hall, Peter Zumthor, and the book Questions of Perception. What it is covering is the first step in understanding phenomenology in architecture. And that means this is a brief review, not a review actually, translating the book Concept of Dwelling by Schulz into architectural principles and meanings that at least I understood, and hopefully you can use them as well. Now, when you go to Concept of Dwelling, the whole book is dedicated to showing or illustrating how humans or subjects have an understanding of their built environment, or a subjective understanding of their built environment that can vary from person to person, culture to culture, location to location, everything that can be personalized, that can be for a single human being, how each one of those can impact understandings of the subjects or humans. Now, that's the point of the book. You can go read the book, and that's what the book will be giving to you. What I am going to use in this video is translating those principles, those ideas that are introduced by Schulz to architectural meanings and how you can actually utilize them. If you go to the chapters of the book, one of the early chapters is dedicated to how humans approach things. To put it in the context, imagine that you are living in a very green environment and you're going to approach a city. Now, cities can be built differently. They can have walls, they can be surrounded by trees, they can be surrounded by mountains. Each city is different. What I want you to imagine is this: a city that has walls, but you can approach it after a very a lot of paths that are curved, they go to the right, left, and you cannot see the city itself, but rather you're going through these curved paths to approach the city. This is one scenario. And the second scenario is, imagine that you're somewhere in Middle East, somewhere that there are no trees, and you're just seeing a city and you're just walking toward the city, or riding a horse or driving a car, whatever. The point here is that the duration that it takes you to these two cities might be the same, going from point A to point B, but because of the way that you're approaching the city, your perception of the time and the way you're perceiving this settlement or city is different. In the case of the desert, you are going toward the city and looking at the city without changing your perspectives, without changing what you're seeing. So you are constantly looking at the city, and it takes you forever to get there. You will have this feeling that, why is this taking so long to get there? Whereas if the path is curved, you are exploring or experiencing something new on every turn that you take, which essentially reduces the time that you perceive to approach or arrive at that city. Now, when you look at these two examples, the first point that this book, I think, can bring for us as architects is that the way you approach something is really important. Now, which one is better? We have both types of the cities that I described to you. So there is literally no good or bad when it comes to us as urban planners or architects to decide how to approach things. It is up to us to decide which one we want. Imagine if it's a temple, you want to probably put it somewhere on a hill, which on the theoretical part, you would say it's higher on the hill, closer to the sky, and all those things. But on the subjective part is the fact that the way that you are approaching this temple will prepare the people that after a long time of constantly looking at this temple, they arrive and are fascinated by your design. So you want to a little bit exhaust them to make sure at the end of the day, they believe that this path they took, this misery that they went through, was worth it for arriving at this specific temple. Whereas if you are designing a city that you want people to come and enjoy, or maybe you want to design a pub that people want to enjoy, the way that you will design this approaching method will be a little bit different. You will give them a chance to experience different things before arriving to the city, and then that might be something important. Another important thing that later on in the next video we will cover is that the city itself can stimulate emotions among humans, and emotions impact how we perceive our environment. Now imagine that you or someone that you know is in this cold environment out of the city, and you're seeing a light or lights of the city, and you're walking and it's very cold. That warm color of the city, the warm color that you will see from the windows in the city while you're walking, will stimulate emotion, will convey the fact that those homes are warm, and your stimulated emotions help you to get there better. Now, it's one of the other fascinating things, but we will cover these things later on. For now, this is the first thing that we need to know, is that this way of approaching is important. And as architects, we need to think about how we want humans to approach what we are designing. Do you want to exhaust them? Do you want to stimulate emotions? Do you want to make them feel comfortable? Do you want to make them feel uncomfortable? Depending on what you are designing, you will decide how you want this whole approaching thing happen. The next step is that the perception of this city, in this case, or settlement, as the concept of dwelling call it, or we as architects, this part is what I am translating the book into, the thing that we are designing, can be buildings, can be monuments, whatever it is, how we want this thing that we are designing to be perceived by our subjects, right, by humans. If you look at great landmarks or great architectural buildings, you probably, or absolutely, if you are not a first-year undergrad, you probably noticed, even if you're an undergrad, in your city, you can remember a specific landmarks by specific things. For example, you might say, this particular building is really tall. You might say this specific monument color is distinctive. It's a bronze color or something like that. Or you can say this building is easily recognizable by the 3 columns that are connected to each other. Or the particular shape, like a pyramid, is easily recognizable, or is a distinctive element of an architectural building. The way we humans perceive those buildings has an impact on how we as architects should design these buildings. Again, this whole thing depends on what you're doing. You might be preserving buildings, so you need to, integrate other buildings and make sure that they blend in. And sometimes you want to design something that stands out, and sometimes you want to design something that everyone can remember. Depending on those, you will make sure that the building is either distinctive or not distinctive, depending on what you're designing, to the subject or humans. To give you an example, this city in a distant location, you will remember them if you look in the European style architecture. You will see the cities with walls and towers. If you look at the ancient maps of castles, you will remember them by their specific rectangular shapes and the side columns. If you go to Babylon, you will see that these stepped pyramids are what that will bring them to your mind. If you think about New York, what will you remember? It's absolutely the sorry, as I was saying, what by remembering city of New York, how you will remember that is the Statue of Liberty and the bridge behind it that will make any depiction, any drawings, any illustration. People will remember New York like that. Why? Because those two are distinctive elements of that city that will make everyone remember that in the modern history, right? If you look into your own cities, if you look into the cities that you have visited, you will remember that these cities that are remembered better than other cities are mostly having distinctive elements that helps them to be remembered. Now, putting the blending in aside, which means technically preserving buildings or preserving heritage, if you want something to be memorable, you need to design the same thing that actually impacts the perception of that specific thing. Again, for these cities, in the concept of approaching and reaching the city, the walls, the towers are all important. Now, something very interesting and culturally distinctive that you will see here is that cathedral buildings or cathedrals are important when you consider it. A city, the location of the city can be easily distinctive or recognizable when you think about the religious part of the cities being designed. If you look at, for example, the Eastern Europe, the cathedral, the Orthodox cathedrals are different. The shape they are is very distinctive, and you can easily guess that this city probably belongs to that particular region. The cathedrals that are built in European cities are very distinctive when it comes to recognizing cities and where they are located. And in other religions like Islam, it's the same concept. They have the cathedral mosques that makes those cities distinctive, and even being able to guess which country this particular structure is built in. So you see that aside from the walls and towers, there is this building that reflects the cultural background of that particular settlement that can be also a distinctive element. This approaching city and perception of the city is technically the first chapter of the book that I believe we as architects need to use this process to design buildings with intentions to either be memorable or not, depending on what you're designing, how people will approach them and all those things. The next chapter is actually talking about what I introduced, the institution. Institution is technically the building that reflects the collective spirit of a particular settlement or city or village or whatever it is, right? In the case, in most of these cases, in the ancient times, this was religion that was playing an important role, and cities were technically designed around these temples, and then later on mosques and churches and all those institutions that were technically connecting the horizontal approach that you had to the city to the sky. This institution was something that was connecting the earth to the sky. You went you go to a church to be connected from the earth to the sky. You go to the mosque for the same reason. You go to a synagogue for the same reason. You go to a temple for the same reason. Those institutions in the ancient times were the point that connected this city to the sky. And this institution was a reflection of the collective experience of that particular region, and mostly shaped by religion in ancient cities. Now that the things are changing and cities are becoming more multicultural, and having different experiences, different institutions, you can find these things in different buildings and not necessarily limited to the religious buildings in cities. That's something that is known as the collective experience or esprit of a dwelling, and that's what I am calling it as part of translating the book into architecture. So this institution is a representative of the collective experience that people have in their cities or villages or settlements that they created. But before reaching this institution, it is very interesting. You come back to the idea of approaching. To approach this institution, you need to go through paths that lead to the institution. And normally marketplaces are surrounding these institutions. Why? Because you go through the marketplaces to approach the institution, right? This is another interesting idea, that how this approaching is happening, right? Normally this approaching is on a hilltop, which the building is closer to the sky, which the connection can be made easily. But on the other side, this institution, that's the spiritual interpretation of that. But more practical interpretation of this is this, that this institution is where most people go to share an experience, and that is connecting from earth to sky or praying to their religion. And it makes sense for the markets to be surrounding this place, because they can interact with more people, because they will be going through this market and then approaching the sky, right? So from a practical point of view, that institution is the core, and then all other community-based events will be surrounding that institution. Why? Because all these people at the end of the day want to go to that institution to share their experiences, despite the fact that they had trades with each other, despite the fact that they're doing business, despite the fact that they are offering trades, despite all those things that are happening within the urban environment. People at the end of the day go to that institution and get connected to sky, as this philosophical text reflected. That is the concept of approaching and the institution. Now, what happens after this, after this connection to the sky? You, or whoever is living in those cities, plan to go back to something that belongs to you. Here comes a new concept of belonging to something. And that is actually one of the later chapters in the book, Concepts of Dwelling, which reflects the idea of home. What is a home? Why do we call a place home? Is it just because you buy it? Or is it just because by conventional traditions, this place is given to you? Is that the reason you call it a home? Or there are more meanings to it? And of course, we know home is somewhere that you feel comfortable, you feel secure, and all those things. More importantly, it is something that reflects your values. When you buy a home, when you're renting a home, you try to design it better. You might be into flowers and you put flowers in the house. You might be into paintings and you might install paintings in the house. You will customize the house so that it reflects your roots, so that it reflects your ideas, so that it reflects your experiences, so that it reflects your cultural background. You want to customize that thing that we call it home to reflect you. And that is the concept of home and what home means to humans. A place that you find refuge, that you find feeling safe, that you fall feeling secure. That is the concept of home. Now, putting it into perspective, this whole concept of dwelling is that you can approach something. If you're coming out of the city, you approach the city, and then you enter the city, you go through the urban areas, market, all those things, and then you reach the institution. And in the institution, you get connected to the sky, and at the end of the day, you go somewhere and stay there, or you dwell there for a limited amount of time. If you are a visitor to that city, or if you're living in that city, you will constantly approach this market, this city, different paths and different routes, and then go back to the home, and this whole cycle continues, right? And during that time, you also go to the institution and the urban environment to socialize with other people, to interact with other people, and get connected to the sky and go back to the home. What this means for us is that in terms of architecture and designing and dwelling, if we are dealing with a large-scale project where socialization and communications are happening, the way of approaching, defining boundaries, and creating a memorable picture or image of the place is important for us, depending on what we are designing. And then entering that building or that public space, which we call it institution, is also important for us, because that's where people can have interactions or get connected to a higher level, which in the philosophical terms, it's the sky, or all the religious establishments. And at the end of the day, they want a place to go back and find refuge, which is their people's home, right? When it comes to smaller projects, you need to customize these projects to reflect the roots and collective experiences. If it's a home, you need to reflect the ideas and the concepts that the inhabitant of that particular home are seeking. Later on, as part of the phenomenology in architecture, in the next video, I'll be describing what elements in the built environment impact emotions, which technically means stimulate emotions, so that people will have an improved experience of a particular place. That is technically the role of architects. That's what architects are supposed to do, stimulating emotions so that people will have better experiences of particular places and the spaces that we are creating. For now, this whole idea was the book Concept of Dwelling that created the basics for phenomenology in architecture. In the next videos, I'll be describing emotions and experience of a space and elements that can impact this experience.